Up until my brother and I are the only time there's been brothers that are partners in the business at the same time. It had been one of the sons kept the business throughout, and so you have to either split the pie down the middle or you got to make the pie bigger. I mean, it's that simple. And anyone that's in a small mom and pop family business knows exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, there's only so much income, there's only so much to go around to feed two families.
Welcome to the ProFab Alliance podcast, episode 2. We are continuing our conversation with Matthew Nix, co-founder of ProFab Alliance and also the president of fifth generation company, Nix Companies. On the last episode, we kind of just talked about the history of Nix Companies and basically what it was before it became Nix Companies.
Yep.
And then we kind of left off that now the fifth generation, which was you, is starting to be full-time, and you started to kind of develop this vision for the company. Just tell me, when you came in full-time, when did it change where you're like, okay, we can't just be a mom and pop shop anymore, or I have a vision of doing more than just passing this off to my kids. I want to do a little bit something different. And I know you don't know exactly what that vision was, but I know you had an initial vision. What was that?
Yeah, so initially there really wasn't a vision. That developed over time, but initially it was just more of a necessity to do things differently, which turned into a desire and drive to grow, which led to a bigger vision. But there were a couple drivers early on that really created a necessity to change the business. One was our legacy agriculture business was rapidly evolving right in front of our eyes. And, I was right at the height of that in early part of my career. I mean, the consolidation in the ag market was happening tremendously, meaning there used to be a small family farm on every corner. They all farmed a few hundred acres and, had their fleet of equipment, and it was smaller equipment and they ran it longer and we worked on that equipment. And now those small family farms are getting consolidated. There's fewer family farms. They're much larger, more significant operations with big new equipment. And especially where we are at, we're very fortunate. This is a pretty affluent ag community. I mean, there's rich soil here, and the farmers do pretty well. And so they just have nice equipment, nice new equipment. Hence, less of a need for a welding shop to work on the equipment. Not to mention, some of the things we used to do, take a marker arm on a planter, for example, that would mark where the corn planter had been in the field. GPS replaced that. I mean, they don't even use those anymore. We used to have those things lined up in the spring where they would hit them on trees and telephone poles, and we would fix them. And that's just one example, one example of many of how the ag industry was rapidly evolving and really making us more and more obsolete all the time. Probably could have made an okay living as a one-man band shop and maybe me and a helper, and we would have done other things too. It's not as if we would have starved, but I was thinking about, I want my kids to come into this business, and if it's changing this much already, what's it going to look like by the time they come in? And so that was necessity number one, to change and evolve. Number two was up until my brother and I, there never, except for the second generation, other than a short time in the second generation, my brother and I are the only time there's been brothers that are partners in the business at the same time. It had been one of the sons kept the business throughout, and so you have to either split the pie down the middle or you got to make the pie bigger. I mean, it's that simple. And anyone that's in a small mom and pop family business knows exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, there's only so much income, there's only so much to go around to feed two families. And then when you think about, my family having kids and Adam's family having kids, and I think this plays out on the family farm every day now, and that drives a lot of the consolidation and growth of those. But so those were two necessities. Needed to evolve and change, needed to grow the business because my brother wants to come and be part of the business now, and we don't want to make a less income. So that's what started my drive to grow the business.
And do you remember, and maybe this is getting too far ahead, but do you remember working with your dad and the story of you looking across the property and saying, I'm not even going to say it. I'm going to let you say it, but tell us about that story and
Sure,
and how
yeah.
that got started.
Yeah, that's become like a big watershed moment in our story, and you've obviously heard me tell this story before. But we were standing in so great grandpa and grandpa built the block building in the 50s, and my dad added this blue pole barn onto it in the 80s, and that shop complex was what I grew up working in, and so I was full time at this point, and that parts where we parked the big equipment that we would be working on. And I was standing in the north door looking across the street, and there was a vacant piece of property there, and it was a ag dealership that had moved to another location in Poseyville, and it had sat vacant. And I pointed across the street to my dad, and I said, I want to buy that property, and I'm going to hire 4 or 5 guys to weld and work over there, and I'm going to sell enough work to keep them all busy. And my dad said, there's not enough work out there for that, and so here we are, going on 20 years later and still trying to, I'm still proving that we haven't run out of work yet. But the difference is, I think when he said out there, his definition of out there was like here, and my definition of out here was here, and that just goes to show you how, perception can become reality, I mean, he perceived that there's not enough work out there in this area, therefore he didn't take any leap to grow, didn't want to, but I thought of out here as something totally different. And so I did end up buying that building, and it was interesting. We paid like $150,000 for that building, and I went to the bank and got a loan. My dad made me go do all of it. I was 24 years old, I think, and went and bought the building, made the deal with the seller, got the loan. Dad, of course, helped supported me, co-signed on the loan or whatever, and he made me go do the deal, which I think was a great business lesson there, that he said, fine, if you want to go do this, I'll back you up, but you're going to go do it. I'm not going to do it for you. I hired the people, and I guess you'd say the rest is history, but there's lots and lots of challenges along the way from that point on.
So I think we're going to backtrack a little bit on it, but I think it's interesting to know, when you hired your first employee outside the family, and
Yep.
if there's a little story there.
Yep. Yeah, there definitely is a story there. So hired the first employee outside the family in 2010, and so I joined the business full time in 2004. So I mean, first point I want to make is there were 6 years there where not a lot changed, and I think for our younger listeners or anyone, maybe not younger, but early in your owning the business or your new career or whatever it is, or a new promotion, we all, myself included, we all have a inclination to want it right now. And of course, our modern technology's made that even worse. But I think it's important to remember, that I was working and grinding and fighting and laying the foundation for 6 years before there was really any change. I mean, almost no noticeable change on the surface. It was all happening under the surface. And so I think that's the first point that I want to really make to everybody. There were things happening inside my head, inside my heart. I was also proving myself. You don't just automatically get the support of your dad to go buy a building or to do these things. You have to prove that. In retrospect, I see that. In the current time, I was frustrated, and there was a lot of battles. But so that was the first thing. So then the second thing was, the team member that we hired, the first one, he was a young guy that his dad was a truck driver, and we worked on his dad's semi, and he grew up coming around through the shop when he was a little kid. And he was going to work, I think, in a summer help. And he came in one day and wanted a job, and we were really busy, and we had never had any employees outside the family. And I went to my dad and I said, hey, this guy wants a job. And he said, well, hire his ass then. That's just how he talks. So I did, and it was that simple. And then he stayed on after high school full time with us and became our first full time employee. And that was in 2010. And then we hired the first salaried support team members in 2013. By that time, we'd grown the business to 6, 7, 8, hourly team members by that point.
Yeah. So you're saying from 2004 to 2010, before you even hired the first outside the family employee, that not much has changed. But even probably after 2010, a lot of people may look at Nix Companies now and see Matthew Nix, president of the company, or Adam Nix, a VP, and not realize that you were a or wear all the hats, one person type of
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
You're out welding, fabricating,
Yeah.
while also trying to do the business side of things. Just talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the struggles that you learn and that you can kind of relate to people that might be listening to this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole podcast or there's a whole book around that one topic. And yeah, that's huge. So, I mean, obviously for 6 years, I was just doing the work. I mean, I was basically an employee. I mean, I became a 50-50 partner with my dad somewhere along the lines. I mean, you can tell how significant of a milestone that was. I don't even remember when it was, but we became 50-50 partners. But in reality, he was calling the shots, of course. And so I just, was a worker. I just did the work, and I was looking for more work, trying to grow the business a little bit. But yeah, so in 2010, that was when I really started to kind of transition into leading the business more and hire the first team member. But even after that, as you said, I mean, it's not like I hired the first person and magically I just went into the office or something like that. I mean, as we grew, within the first couple of years, we had some big projects we were doing, so we staffed up very quickly. Well, I was going out and selling the work. I was trying to find people that, to sell work to. I would sell the work, I would estimate the work, I would draw the work if someone needed to, design it on paper. I don't do CAD, but would draw the work. We would execute the work. Sometimes I would, be in the shop with them. Sometimes I wouldn't, just depending on if I needed to be in the field looking at work, quoting work, whatever. A lot of days I would be in the shop, and then I would help paint it after hours, and then I would load it on a truck the next day, and I would deliver it, and we would start all over again. So I got very involved with the accounting early on. I would invoice everything. Then my wife joined to help with that aspect of the business. And so yeah, you wear a whole lot of hats, and you have to slowly give one of those hats away to somebody else. And I think the one thing I would make is, a mentor told me one time is that you need to be operating in your best and highest role. And that best and highest role changes sometimes day to day. I mean, you have an overarching one. We all have certain God-given strengths and talents. And I think it's very important to recognize what those are and try your best to operate within those. Now, there's days where you have to step outside of that, and so there's no mystery that I'm the visionary of the business, and, I'm the one that's trying to push us forward from a business development standpoint. I'm very passionate about people and culture aspect of our company. But on any given day, I have to get involved in very mundane operational things and some things that require organization and structure that's not a strength of mine, but you have to do that. But my point is, as you hand the hats off that are not your strength and weaknesses, or things that take the life out of you. That's okay to do that, And so find people that are really good at those things. And it's amazing. Things that suck the life out of me will fill someone else up because they love that. Someone that loves detail and structure and everything. They could just go and go and go. And for me, it would just bog me down. And so on the flip side, creativity fills me up, and that would just, it's exhausting to them. It's funny when we sit in a strategic planning meeting all day, I'm just alive at the end of it, and they're like, I'm so exhausted from thinking strategically all day, and so we're just different. And so as you hand the hats off, identify what your God-given strengths are and identify what your weaknesses are, and then those are the hats. But that doesn't mean you give it away and then you don't pay attention to it. You got to trust but verify and make sure that you've put controls in place to check to make sure it's still happening the way it needs to happen. That's a really, really abbreviated version of, how I've delegated and handed hats off over the years.
Yeah, I think that'll be another episode, probably outside the 100X, where we just talk about delegating and bringing that value to people, but and educating people, because even me as a business owner, I'm learning that too. But let's talk about your big break. I know there's a couple, but there's one I think in particular.
Yep.
That was a big break, but actually was a lot of work, and I would love to know how that propelled you guys into the future.
Yep. Yeah, so somewhere along the lines there, I guess it was probably 2008 or 9, a gentleman approached me, and he wanted to build a custom metal yacht. And again, you got to remember, we're in the middle of the cornfield, and we mostly fix farm equipment at this time. We do a little bit of, and for this particular guy, the biggest fabrication project I'd ever done for him was an iron fence, wrought iron fence in front of his house, and like a couple other little things. I mean, nothing that would qualify me to build a custom metal yacht. So he approached our business and wanted to do it, and Dad and Grandpa had no interest in that. They were happy sticking with what they were doing, but as a real stroke of luck and genius, my grandpa said to my dad, if Matthew wants to do this, we need to support him. And really, I think what he meant by supporting was we've got to take care of all the legacy business so that he can do this. I mean, it was like a 2-year-long project. And so without getting into all the details, I mean, what I thought was going to be a simple steel barge to put on the river here turned into a really, really, noteworthy. I mean, it was written up in some national yacht publications. There was a Dutch barge design that was altered. It was the first one of its kind here in the United States, and the gentleman that we built it for had a real eye and knack for marine architecture and had owned a number of high-end boats, and that's where my dad likes to say he was just young and dumb enough to do it, and there's a lot of truth to that. And so we didn't even have a building to do it in. We've rented the building across the street, which we now own, next to where our main office is, and that was part of why we hired the first team member, if we back up in the story a little bit, and brought him in to help me build that yacht. And it was a 2-year project, and a lot of people naturally probably think, it was like I think it was $1 million yacht when it was done, and people probably think, well, then we made a ton of money on that, but it was just time and material. I treated them fair. It was not any different than working on farm equipment. I mean, we had an hourly rate, and I charged the hourly rate, and so we didn't get rich building the yacht, but what it did was created a lot of publicity and notoriety for our business, and it really gave me a sense of confidence of, oh my gosh, if I could do this, because even my dad and grandpa, who are my heroes and who, in terms of the craft of our business that I looked up to, I mean, they're the best in our craft, and they really are. There were many times when I would ask them a question, and they would say, I don't know how you're going to do that. I had to figure it out. So imagine being in your early 20s and figuring something out on your own that your dad and grandpa couldn't do for you. That instilled a lot of confidence in me to go to the next level and think, if we can do this, what else can we do? And so that really propelled us towards, I think the next part of the story is when the core business that we do today, how that got started. Because the boat is really an outlier. But to me, it's kind of a hinge point between the legacy farm repair business, the commercial industrial company we are today. And that was a real pivotal moment.
Yeah, cool. So obviously the yacht brought tons of publicity. I think businesses can relate to that, right? Doing a project that's out of their comfort zone, but if you knock it out of the park, it basically prepares you to be on to the next job or whatever. But yeah, the yacht's not what is your guys' core business today. That started from another project. What project kind of kickstarted what you guys do today?
Yep. So right about that same time, there's a gentleman I knew locally that worked for a company that did electrical controls and automation, primarily for the mining industry. And they were building what we refer to as e-houses. They're modular buildings that house electrical controls and automation equipment, big, heavy industrial electrical equipment. It's a good way to dumb it down. And they build these buildings and then they ship them on site, so they're kind of plug and play. And so we were modifying shipping containers for this guy and to ultimately become e-houses. And he was talking about some other buildings. And I said, what other buildings? He said, well, a lot of times we have to custom build these buildings because the shipping containers aren't big enough. Again, we're a very small mom and pop business at the time. And he says, well, you wouldn't be interested in that, would you? I'm hungry and wanting to grow. And I said, absolutely. I'd love to take a look at that. Certainly was not qualified, didn't have the shop space, didn't have the equipment, didn't have the manpower to do it. So I go on a field trip with him. We go to look at some of these modular buildings that he's purchased recently. And I looked at them and I thought, again, keep in mind, I just built a custom metal yacht that I had no idea how I was going to do. And I thought, well, gosh, this is a square box. I can do this. And so turns out he had an order of like 12 of them coming up to bid on. So, I'm thinking, well, I might get like one to start with. Oh no, he had 12 he needed done, and it was either 12 or none. So then I was like, oh shit, what am I gonna do now? So I'll never forget my wife and I were on our way to Florida for just a little vacation, just the two of us, and I was bidding the project on a yellow legal pad. And at the time, we were only doing about $500,000 a year in annual revenue. We had grown it from about $350,000 to $500,000 at that point. This one project, when I got done it, totaling it all up, was $550,000, more than our annual revenue at the time. And I thought, oh boy. But we got the job, and that really catapulted us. We didn't have the equipment, the manpower. My brother and I had to go out and hire people. There's a story around that as well that we need to share in the next episode. Had to hire the people, had to hire the equipment, or had to buy the equipment to execute all this work. We ran 2 shifts to get the work done, and that provided a real jumping off point to go to the next level. And so that project was the launching pad, and I think that's a really good spot to pick up in the next episode. So we've just landed a job that's going to double our business overnight, and it sounds really exciting, but you can imagine the challenges that came along with that.
I'm going to basically leave it at that. You're going to hear in the next episode, you planted all these seeds, and finally a project clicked that you said, like you said, it doubled your business overnight. I think listeners are going to be excited to hear the challenges. I think a lot of people will realize, when they're stepping out of their comfort zone, these other smaller fabrication machining shops, and they're like, I'm going to go do something a little bit bigger, take on a big contract like that. What are some of the headaches? And I think this will be a good learning opportunity for them. So stick around, come back, listen to the next episode here at the ProFab Alliance podcast as we continue talking about the 100X story with Nix Companies, where they took a 100-year-old company, grew it 100 times in 20 years.